And it's BBOR, Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, everybody. Today is Friday, another Cooper Friday. Welcome to the show. How's everybody doing? Normally, I come to you guys with pre recorded episodes of Cooper Friday, but for this one, I decided to go live because there are a lot of different subjects that I wanted to cover in this episode, and I thought that going live would be a very nice way to do so. Firstly, my name is Black Box Ned, and I am your host, and you can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop something in the comments section down below. And this show is available on all major podcasting apps under the names Black Box True Crime and Black Box Podcast. Charlie is here. Good morning. Charlie, you can also chill again with the Fox today. Charlie was here yesterday for the live stream True Crime Talk Radio in the morning. And before we truly begin, there were a couple of other shout outs that I wanted to give on this episode of Cooper Friday. Number one, like I said yesterday, if you like hearing about different types of true crime stories, you can go over to the Citizen Detective podcast and subscribe over there. They are just short of 1,000 subscribers, like 993. And more fittingly for Cooper Friday, the DB Cooper Sleuth channel that is run by Ryan Burns is also approaching 1,000 subscribers. If you're curious about the DB Cooper mystery, that's the place to be. I'm going to be talking about Ryan Burns' videos in this episode, so please go over to DB Cooper Sleuth, and subscribe. And there's also a channel that gives us the title of today's episode, and it is The Trading Post, which is run by Fred and Noodle. And the Trading Post has many different subjects, but it's an up-and-coming channel that's going to be talking about not only true crime, but things like ghost stories, stories of human experience, and everything under the sun or in the darkness, it seems. Scott is here. Hey, Scott, how's it going? Cat Daddy Steve says, good morning, Ned. Good morning to you too, Cat Daddy Steve. All right, so the Trading Post did a video on DB Cooper, amongst other things. And I first learned about this channel because of longtime BBOR follower Batman66, who recommended that I watched Fred's 5-part series on the Zodiac Killer. And I became a subscriber because I could see that he was following a lot of different subjects that I talk about here on Black Box Online Radio. One of them was DB Cooper. On November 24th of 1971, Thanksgiving Eve, DB Cooper boarded a plane that was going from Portland, Oregon to Seattle, Washington. He handed a note to the flight attendant, which she put into her pocket and didn't read immediately. Then he told her that she should look at it again because he had a bomb in his briefcase. He then opened up the contents of it and revealed the contents of his briefcase, and she could see that there was what appeared to have been a bomb, which, as I understand, was a set of red cylindrical tubes that were connected with wires, and there was what appeared to have been a battery. Then DB Cooper skyjacked the plane. However, the other passengers on board weren't completely pulled into this world of the skyjacking. They didn't even know that the plane was skyjacked. They did notice that the 36-minute flight from Portland to Seattle took over 2 hours. So then the plane lands in Seattle, Washington, and then a different flight attendant, the first one was Florence Schaffner, the second one I'll be talking about is Tina Mucklow. She was instructed to go and get DB Cooper's demands, $200,000 in ransom and 4 parachutes, 2 back parachutes and 2 front parachutes, which she brought to Cooper. One of the flight attendants who had walked onto the plane and off the plane was Florence Schaffner, and she said that she had left her purse on the plane, and she asked DB Cooper if she could go back and retrieve it, and he said that was fine and he would not bite. So she retrieves her purse, and the other flight attendant was Alice Hancock, and those two leave, and Tina Mucklow stays on board. Then Tina Mucklow goes up with the rest of the crew, and she, after instructing DB Cooper on how to lower the aft staircase, and the aft staircase was on the back, and then DB Cooper parachuted into the night, never to be seen or heard from again. So what happened to DB Cooper? What happened to the money? What happened to anything in this mystery? It really is somewhat complicated and somewhat of a very big challenge. So I'm watching this video from the Trading Post, and actually we have Batman66 here. Hey, Batman66, thank you so much for recommending that channel. The Trading Post has a lot of good stuff. So I'm watching this video from the Trading Post, and the host is saying some of his initial responses. Number one, DB Cooper seemed extremely cool, calm, and collected, and he even likened DB Cooper to that of James Bond. The way that he's interacting with the stewardesses, where they aren't threatened by him, they don't think that he is being rude to them, they don't think that he is being aggressive or overly abrasive, and I am somewhat in the middle. I wouldn't put DB Cooper on the level of James Bond, and part of me tends to wonder if actually DB Cooper was not as elite and high society as James Bond, but rather somewhat of someone who was trying to act out that fantasy of being very cool and suave. Point number two, and this is really interesting stuff from the Trading Post. He began to notice, by he, I mean the host's name is Fred. Fred began to notice that DB Cooper's cool behavior on the plane and the fact that he isn't extremely nervous might indicate that number one, he was ex military, but number two, maybe a very advanced form of military operations like special forces, maybe black ops. To you guys in the chat right now, can you name a DB Cooper suspect who had a similar background, special forces, black ops? Maybe he even worked as a mercenary. I want to see if you guys can put something in the chat that is going to bring us closer to that point. I think there is a very, very obvious DB Cooper suspect that would fit that mold. And interestingly, Fred from the Trade and Aiding Post did not discuss any of the suspects in the episode, and was a very big introductory statement. And we have Mike and Cat Daddy Steve who say Ted Braden. And I really thought it was just remarkable that this guy is doing his first video on DB Cooper, just a newcomer to the material, and he's just saying, wait a second, this looks like military special forces and black ops. That sounds like Ted B. Braden, the subject of the book Paratrooper of Fortune by Drew Beeson. Drew also talks a lot about Ted Braden and DB Cooper on his own YouTube channel, Drew Beeson True Crime and Missing Persons. Hey, Chris M., how you doing? So, it's just kind of interesting how he was putting two and two together, and that's why I like the channel, The Trading Post. Again, the suspects were not mentioned. However, I think that this is just looking less and less likely for Richard Floyd McCoy to have been DB Cooper. When you hear these descriptions from somebody else, just reading off the DB Cooper story, Cooper seems like he's in complete control the whole time. Cooper has this non-threatening demeanor. Cooper is not showing signs of extreme nervousness. And Richard Floyd McCoy is perhaps one of the most widely discussed DB Cooper suspects, maybe the most widely discussed DB Cooper suspect. And Richard McCoy would go on to attempt a skyjacking later on, which in some ways it was a success. I've called Richard McCoy an absolute failure in the past, but in some ways McCoy's skyjacking it started out as a success, and he was able to do some things associated with it, and then it just all fell apart, and he was busted, and McCoy went to jail. But he's nervous the whole time. He's putting on these fake disguises and the mustache. He's just kind of like sweating bullets. So they say, allegedly, reportedly, McCoy used a grenade, a dummy grenade, to do the skyjacking, and Cooper's bomb was put together in a more sophisticated manner. Oh, Batman66 says, I think Cooper was on a mild sedative. Fair enough. Fair enough. I mean, here's something else, though. Like, Richard McCoy had his go-to of eating candy, and I was discussing this with Brian Burns when we did the interview on McCoy. Melissa says, what date was the DB Cooper heist? November 24th, 1971. And Lacey is here. Good morning, Ned, and good morning, everyone. Good morning to you, too, Lacey. Yeah, November 24th, 1971, Thanksgiving Eve. But the McCoy deals with nervousness by eating candy. Does that completely rule him out? Because DB Cooper didn't eat candy on the plane. He was smoking cigarettes and drinking bourbon and 7-Up. Does that rule out McCoy? Mostly. I know not 100%, and I know what people are going to try to say, people who think that Richard McCoy was DB Cooper. Well, he changed things. He wanted to do things differently. If he ordered bourbon and 7-Up and was smoking cigarettes the whole time, then he would have given it away, right? So he's doing something different. McCoy was sloppy. He was not cool. He was not calm. He was not collected, and he was a wreck. So I think those are some strikes against him. But I had the opportunity to recently interview Ryan Burns of the DB Cooper Sleuth channel, and what I said to him prior to the interview was, Richard McCoy was a real skyjacker, and there's an episode of the FBI files about McCoy on YouTube, which you can watch for free. And when I was watching that one, I was like, this is not an action movie. This is better than an action movie. Like, it's an exhilarating episode of the FBI files. That might be the second best episode of the FBI files that I've ever seen. Number one, of course, would be talking about Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber. So the other points from the Trading Post that I thought were very good is when Fred, the host, is simply just looking at how the evidence was not preserved and the evidence was not well kept for future um, investigations. And he was zoning in particularly on the DNA. And I was also impressed with someone like him doing his first DB Cooper episode as a newcomer, going through reports and simply highlighting the points when they're saying that the DNA evidence in the DB Cooper case might be unreliable. Goodness. And that's just not a good way to start. But, he's just looking at, wait a second. If we don't have DB Cooper's DNA, this is not going to look good and for trying to solve the case. And one of the things that has been brought up is that there were multiple hairs that were found from DB Cooper that he should have left behind, because it's my understanding that DB Cooper was the only person to sit in his seat on the plane that day. Even though it's the day before Thanksgiving, it really does not seem like it was a very busy day for flight travel, and he's not dealing with any packed flights. So there are two hairs that were found. One was from the head, and that was back on the headrest, and then another one was from a limb, which I can only understand to be an arm hair, and a head hair. Now, the head hair from the headrest was preserved on a slide, but it's not completely clear that that was destroyed or not. It's my understanding, and again, I'm citing DB Cooper's sleuth for this, that the slide was lost, but they had it for many, many years. And it's simply lost, but it could be recovered. Mr. JSV is here. Hey, Mr. JSV 650. Hello. So, there are also two videos that I would recommend to you guys from the DB Cooper Sleuth channel made by Ryan Burns. And one of them specifically deals with the cigarettes. Very famously, DB Cooper is on the plane. He orders the bourbon and 7-Up, which is sometimes called a bourbon and soda. And then he is smoking 8 Raleigh cigarettes. Now, that should actually be 7 Raleigh cigarettes, because one of the cigarettes was smoked by Tina Mucklow. DB Cooper offered her a cigarette, and she said no, she had just quit, but then, she ends up taking it anyway. And as Fred from the Trading Post said, well, maybe, she was a little bit stressed out as she's being forced into this liaison role from a skyjacker who has a bomb in his briefcase and is threatening to blow everybody up if he doesn't get what he wants. Maybe she was a little bit stressed out. You can give him that. Give Tina that too. But that means there were only 7 cigarettes that were smoked by DB Cooper. Somebody once wrote into the channel saying, I think the cigarettes are a nothing burger about DB Cooper's personality. I don't know. DB Cooper is spending hours on the plane, and he's only smoking 7 cigarettes. I'm not completely convinced that that's a nothing burger. If anything, that shows that DB Cooper perhaps was not an extreme chain smoker, unless Batman 66 is spot on and he took a mild sedative to calm his nerves, and maybe he didn't feel the need to smoke the cigarettes. And by the way, everybody, can you hear me all right? I've noticed that my camera has been freezing up a little bit. Not exactly freezing up, but just a little bit slow. Do you guys hear me all right? Put something in the chat if you can hear everything loud and clear. As far as the cigarettes go, I do have to tend to lean toward that DB Cooper was not an extreme chain smoker. But then, the cigarette butts were sent for analysis, and DNA technology didn't exist in 1971. We didn't really start solving cases with DNA until the 1980s. So they were destroyed, and Ryan Burns was proposing that they were destroyed in December of 1971 simply because they could not extract fingerprints from the cigarettes. They couldn't get any evidence out of them. So the cigarettes were most likely thrown into a trash can. I would have thought that they would have been incinerated. Some people have this well, it's not even a belief. It's just one practice with destroying evidence is to incinerate it, but the cigarettes may have been thrown into the trash can. That means there's even less evidence. Now, as I said, with the hair slide, it's possible that that could still exist somewhere, and we just don't simply know where that is, what to do with that, or what to make of that. And there's another story that I want to get to in this episode of Cooper Friday. And one of the reasons why I wanted to go live was I wanted to talk about many different subjects within one single episode. As many of you know, I've done 2 episodes about the suspect of the UFC fighter Chael Sonnen. Chael Sonnen was a former MMA fighter, as I said, with UFC. And he has gone on many shows talking about how he knows who DB Cooper is, and he doesn't want to give away the name of the suspect. But if Lehman comes on here, Lehman is the one who perhaps tracked down Chael Sonnen's suspect using the clues that Chael gave to the audience, and he says that he's identified the guy, and Lehman even posted that in a Facebook group about whom he thinks Chael Sonnen's suspect is. This got shared around a little bit, and some people started contacting Chael Sonnen and just trying to ruffle his feathers a little bit, so to speak, and also pry more information out of him. And I would hope that nobody is going to do that in a way that is intentionally designed to agitate someone. If you want to ask questions for clarity and follow up, sure, go ahead and do that. But if you are simply just trying to bother somebody, even if it's Chael Sonnen, UFC fighter, millionaire perhaps, he is a millionaire. He does business things outside of UFC too. Even if it's him, I would just hope that people would not do that, because if anything, that would make somebody shut down and just not even want to give away other parts of the story. And as you see, the DB Cooper case can form into these types of mysteries within a mystery, because he's just saying, I know who DB Cooper is. All right, well, let's try and find out who his suspect is. Now, is this suspect viable? The suspect proposed by Lehman was 29 years old at the time, and he was part Native American. And in the most recent episode, of Cooper Friday, I was talking about possible drop zones. And one thing that I find to be so conflicting about this DB Cooper suspect that has been proposed by Chael Sonnen is the drop zone. Because in more or less, some people started messaging Chael Sonnen, and I even wrote a big email for him talking about all the points. And he made a response in a video that was aired on Cameo. And what he said was just that he was invited to CooperCon, but he doesn't want to talk at CooperCon. And he stated that his suspect lived in Salem, Oregon at the time. And I just keep wondering about how he's going to try and make his particular drop zone work. At first, I thought he landed in southern Washington, DB Cooper, Chael suspect DB Cooper, and then he would had a motorcycle station there, and then he went to the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest, and then northeast to the Yakima Reservation. But then he's talking about all of these things from Oregon, that his suspect went to high school at St. Paul, Oregon, his suspect lived in Salem, Oregon, and the other drop zone that I would have said had to be much, much farther to the west, landing above the Columbia River, crossing into the Mount Hood National Forest, and into the Warm Springs Indian Reservation, which is southeast. It's east and southeast of the Mount Hood National Forest. Well, which one is it? So, the suspect in question that Lehman has identified turns out to be a Yakima. And Lehman openly shared this with me. He's like, hey, it looks like the first drop zone you predicted was correct, landing by the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest and then going through the to the Yakima Reservation. Well, how does that get him back to Salem, Oregon? And this is what I'm talking, these parts of the story. So I just somebody like Chael Sonnen could just come out. He could write his own DB Cooper book, say, I have a suspect, this is what I think happened, and put everything all out there. 50 years, and the FBI cannot hold on to cigarette butts for longer than a couple of months. Weird. No, the FBI cannot hold on to the cigarette butts for weird. With the car door from Lake Berryessa in the Zodiac case, they can at least look at the handwriting, do handwriting analyses. Sherwood Morrill could work his magic. Hashtag sarcasm. And, I really don't know if that's going to be the most valuable form of evidence, but there's a reason for them to keep the car door. They thought that the cigarette butts just weren't going to be valuable, that they weren't going to be usable, and that they weren't going to be beneficial in any way, so they were destroyed. This case would be a slam dunk if they held on to those things. They're cigarettes. They should have all types of saliva DNA on there. You should have a solid exact profile, plus the hair slide. Hair and cigarettes put together, that should tell you who DB Cooper is. So that's why I'm saying that I don't think that DB Cooper is on the level of James Bubb, because of the simple fact that the reason why he hasn't been caught or identified is the evidence wasn't properly preserved. Now, they didn't know about DNA, but somebody has written this very eloquently for Black Box Online Radio once. Investigators should always foresee advancements in forensic technology, advancements in criminology, and advance. Sorry, I'm just laughing at Batman 66. He says, Ned, we've been trying to reach you about your extended warranty. Yes, one good thing about being in the Philippines is I can mostly avoid those scam calls. But I'll be back in West Virginia very soon. I'll start dealing with them again. A lot, too. Batman also says, one heard read Raleigh's was unusual for Canada or even Washington. It was popular with the East Coast during the 1970s. Well, I mean, maybe. I'm not 100% sure of that. What was shared on Ryan Burns' channel is that Raleigh cigarettes, the brand that DB Cooper was smoking, was more popular among working class individuals. But then he played an advertisement for Raleigh cigarettes on his YouTube channel. He played the whole commercial, and it showed a family where the husband has on a button-up shirt and a tie, and his wife is also very well dressed. And by working class, I think they just mean not extremely rich, and they definitely looked like what we would call middle class in 2024. But here's an issue. This is stuff from the Trading Post. Fred was saying, just reading off some stuff from the basic Cooper introduction. DB Cooper seemed to be extremely familiar with the Pacific Northwest. Now, I might be reading way too much into this, but he's going through the actions of DB Cooper, saying they're taking off, from Seattle. And he makes comments about the military base that is in the area, is what he says to Tina Mucklow. So, I mean, that should indicate that he knows a little bit about Seattle. Then he says it looks like Tacoma down there. Seattle has SeaTac Airport, right? Seattle Tacoma Airport. Looks like Tacoma down there. That sounds like someone who has some basic familiarity with the layout of the Seattle Tacoma area. Because, I mean, I'm from West Virginia, and we don't normally talk about Tacoma, Washington, unless possibly we're bringing up the University of Puget Sound, other than in conjunction with Seattle, but very rarely. I tend to believe that Cooper had intense familiarity with the Pacific Northwest. Hey, Chael Sonnen, eat your heart out. I mean, you want to talk about a suspect who just jumped into his backyard? Well, what they didn't know about Cooper is that he knew exactly where he was. He would have been able to just kind of walk through the forests because he was completely familiar with all these locations. He grew up there. Eat your heart out. Bring it on. Oregon, Seattle, great places to look for a DB Cooper suspect. I'm going to chill with the Fox for a second. And Batman 66 says Raleighs were also popular among steelworkers too. Sure. I mean, if you want to say working class and include steelworkers, I get you there. But Misha says, I tried to be cool in college and smoked Raleighs. Touch cigarette. Misha, so would you say that Raleighs are for working class types or middle class types? But also, when you said touch cigarette, I thought you were going to say touch DNA. I mean, if this guy's smoking 7 cigarettes, and if they were just preserved the way that they should have been preserved, there should be all kinds of DNA, touch DNA, saliva DNA. Maybe one of his hairs would have fallen on that or something. I'm joking about that, but not really. There should be all types of DNA on those cigarettes. Mike says, I agree with Ryan Burns that the cigarette butts would matter a lot in a court case. If they had a suspect, it's not just about the DNA. Well, that's it, though. The DNA is only useful if you have the suspect to compare it to. We have countless true crime cases where they have a perpetrator who has committed a rape and left semen behind. Someone cut themselves when they were stabbing somebody with a knife and they have blood. They have DNA. Having DNA does not solve the case purely. You have to compare that and connect it to somebody. Melissa says, I hear you, but I had to pause to the live to take a phone call, so I'm about 5 minutes behind. As long as you can hear me, Melissa. And Misha says, tough. It was tough. Strong killed my lungs. Well, Cooper is the poor man's James Bond, so to speak. I'm sorry to steal that from Kurt Saxon, but... And Melissa says, any evidence of Pall Mall cigarettes? Cooper smoked Raleigh cigarettes. I don't really know if they're evidence of Pall Malls. And Misha says, another tough one, hurt the lungs. Pall Malls hurt the lungs, no filter. Oh, yes, and that was in the advertisement that Brian Burns had posted, filtered and non-filtered cigarettes. So, as far as we go through the DB Cooper world, and trying to build a profile for this suspect. Ex-military, I love it. Special forces and black ops, highly possible, but I'm not completely convinced. I mean, if you want to build a profile for Ted Braden and use that as a piece of evidence, as I said, highly possible, but I'm not completely convinced. Regular smoker, yes. I definitely don't think that that was Cooper lighting up his first cigarette. Like, again, going back to Richard McCoy, about somebody who's just going to sit back, light his first cigarette, and then is going to... That's what would have happened if some guy who had never smoked before. And what the reason I'm bringing this up is they're trying to say that the FBI has made, this statement that they don't believe that Cooper was a regular smoker because he only smoked 7 cigarettes on the duration. How about a casual smoker? I mean, I think that's exactly the way Cooper was. He just didn't go cigarette after cigarette. I think that he would have the occasional cigarette in his life. Now let's go to the next piece of discussion material here. We have Tina Bar. In 1980, they found the money at Tina Bar, $5,800, rubber bands, 3 stacks of bills. You guys know that story. And on the DB Cooper Sleuth channel, with the video that Ryan Burns put out last week, he stated that he hates Tina Bar, and even if we identify the perpetrator, if we identify DB Cooper, that does not mean we will learn how the money got there to Tina Bar. And I want to ask you guys in the chat, do you have any theories on how the money got to Tina Bar? I mean, I'm definitely going to approach this with an open mind. By the way, when I was watching that episode of the DB Cooper Sleuth channel, somebody wrote into the live chat, I think his name was Abraham, and I think he's also commented here on Cooper Friday that he was the one who planted the money there in Tina Bar, at Tina Bar in 1980. And Brian Burns was just like, no, you didn't. I don't know why, but someone who listens to these shows claims that they were the one who did it. I would side with Ryan on that one. But let's look at one theory that was put forward. On the very first episode of Cooper Friday, I talked to you guys about the documentary, The Skyjacker That Got Away. And their theory was that, number 1, DB Cooper did not survive the jump. Number 2, DB Cooper lands either in the Columbia River or perhaps the Lewis River, but he dies during the jump, and his parachute gets tangled up in the propeller of a boat and then is dragged upstream on the Columbia, and that's how the money gets at Tina Bar, and then Cooper is separated from the propellers at some point, and he's most likely at the bottom of the Columbia. Nonsense. Pure nonsense. Despicable nonsense. When you actually look under the surface about that, I mean, does that make sense to you that Cooper drowned in the Columbia and his propeller? I mean, his parachute got caught up in the propeller. I mean, but the problems that I have with that is, number 1, the diatoms that were found on the money. They were found from the Lewis River, not the Columbia, and they were reported to have been spring diatoms from the spring season. Lehman is here. Hey, Lehman, how's it going? Natural causes, a soil and water conservationist from the area would be able to explain it possibly. I'm really leaning toward natural causes some way, somehow, Lehman, that the money was lost in a different place and that it ended up at Tina Bar. And a lot of people just don't think it could have arrived there by natural causes. That's why they think that DB Cooper came back there and he planted it at Tina Bar specifically. It's defendable. I mean, it's defendable. You just have to ask yourself the question, what about those diatoms? Why is there evidence that it was in the Lewis River, which would have been up near Lake Merwin? But Cooper dying in the river and being caught up in the propeller, people aren't going to notice that there's a parachute in their propeller of the boat. Hey, what's going on? I think that's just the mainstream media looking for a convenient narrative. Now, Lehman, you're on here, and do you mind if I talk about Chael Sonnen's suspect anymore? I mean, I haven't said his name on the channel. I know you posted it in a Facebook group. Just let me know. You're the one who made the discovery. It's all your all the credit goes to you. And Scott says, curious about everyone's thoughts on Cooper's letter's legitimacy. And yes, there are multiple letters that have reportedly come from DB Cooper. and people can weigh in the comment section. Do you think the Cooper letters are real? Do you think the Cooper cipher is real? Batman66 says, there's no way DB Cooper survived the jump. His jump has never exactly been duplicated. Yeah, exactly. Okay, fair enough, Batman66. I was going to say people can duplicate the jump during the daytime, but wearing a lot of gear. Okay, Lehman is here. He says, go ahead. The name of Chael Sonnen's alleged suspect is Thomas Eugene Jetty. Tom Jetty, spelled Jettee. And even though I've just said that, I openly ask people, please don't try to contact family members or something and start asking them questions and so on. They're private citizens who didn't ask to be part of any of this. But Chael Sonnen's suspect is most likely Thomas Eugene Jetty. He was part Native American, and he had Yakima ancestry. He was someone who was 43 years old at the time. He played six-man football, right, Lehman? Six-man football, not eight-man football or five-man football, six-man football for St. Paul High School in Oregon. He took skydiving lessons in secret, allegedly. And this is how Lehman tracked him down, because Lehman is a sports historian, and Chael was talking about how they played five-man football at his high school in Oregon, and it appears that is also incorrect information, that it wasn't five-man football. But anyway, Lehman was able to deduce that this is the guy that matches the bill with Native American ancestry. There are lots of photos of him that are now being shared around in the groups, and shout out to Nikki B, who did contact Chael and just asking for some clarifications. And he's like, is your suspect Thomas E. Jetty? And he's like, no, skyjacking is illegal. If he were, he would have been apprehended. And is that just trolling? Somebody was saying in the chat that Chael's being hyperbolic. When I read that line, that if this were his suspect, that made me doubt even some things that I had said, that he was maybe just making the whole thing up, because I've always said, I don't think that Chael Sonnen was making the whole thing up. I think that he was actually trying to share a story that was in his family. And Lehman says, okay, he may have been as young as 28 at the time. Tom Jetty may have been 28 or 29 at the time. Somebody responded to my episode last week about Chael Sonnen's suspect, who is possibly Tom Jetty. And they said, Ned, what you got to understand is, back in those days, it was normal for people to just share those types of stories around. In the 1970s, somebody saying, yeah, I think my uncle's DB Cooper. I think my sister's godfather is DB Cooper. People said stuff like that. Doesn't mean that it's true. It also doesn't mean that there's an ounce of depth to them. When somebody is just accusing a family member of being DB Cooper and they just kind of go with it. Yeah, got to leave town for a while. And people would play along with the act. So, I'm definitely not convinced that Tom Jetty was DB Cooper. I think it's really interesting to talk about how DB Cooper had an olive skin tone, olive complexion, and that does get left out of a lot of the artistic renderings. Like when they take the composite sketches of DB Cooper and they bring them to life, I give credit to Chael for this one. Very frequently, they are depicted as white men who are as white as snow. But he's like, they're saying DB Cooper had olive skin. He may have even been Hispanic looking. Credit goes to him for that. Hey, Charlie, how's it going? Charlie is here. And Batman66 says people also appeared older back then. Absolutely. They bring this up all the time in Facebook memes. Have you guys ever seen that stuff when they say that, this is like how they would depict a 45-year-old in 1980 or something with completely gray hair or something, wearing the old person style sweater. And yes, they did. Look at Richard McCoy. He looked older than 29 at first. Over time, you can kind of see that Richard McCoy was somebody who definitely had younger features. He would have been 29 years old at the time of the skyjacking. And I don't mean to zone in purely on McCoy for this episode. It's just, I had the opportunity to interview Ryan Burns, and we talked about McCoy for a whole episode, which you can hear on Black Box Online Radio. And then I didn't really get a chance to do all of my follow-ups specifically. And I've also talked a little bit about Ted Braden. But really, I just kind of want to know, do you guys have any more questions about DB Cooper or any more comments or anything else that you would like to share for this live stream, you can put them in the section down below. And I want to remind everybody that I will be going on the channel Mysteries with Mr. Belgique this weekend to talk about the disappearance of Maura Murray. And I invite you to check that out. And I was reading a news article that came out on everend.com, EVERAND, everend.com, and it's a place that I've been using a little bit more recently for true crime material. I also have been using that source for the Jack the Ripper episodes. And I was reading about the story of Tina Mucklow, the flight attendant that spent the most amount of time with D.B. Cooper. And they're talking about a movie that was going to be made perhaps about her, but also about Cooper, called Not If You Understand. And yes, they've made several movies about D.B. Cooper, maybe even one involving Bigfoot. And then they are going to talk about Tina's experiences. Again, Not If You Understand. Apparently, they started production in 2022, so I'm still waiting to hear more about that. And I really was hoping that I wasn't going to be talking to you guys about this as a preview and then find out that it's already out, because I'm in the Philippines right now. So when I do Google searches, I don't get the most accurate film and TV news. Terrible, terrible. First world problems are so hard. But in terms of Tina's interactions with D.B. Cooper, my one concern about this movie is something that was shared in the Everend article, and that is that Tina Mucklow was interacting with D.B. Cooper, and there are all of these stories about how Cooper is non-threatening, and he's not trying to bother them. He even offers Tina the tip, and, she says, "Can I have some of that money?" And he offers her some of it, and she says, "No, I can't accept tips." Right. So, I think that they're going to try and portray Cooper as a terrifying figure and as some type of scary, bizarre man. And I don't know if that's going to be the most accurate. And that's giving me the type of vibes that this is going to be a Lifetime-style movie where you have this woman who's just going to be acting more or less like a scared little girl, and then big, scary man is threatening to kill people if she doesn't do what he wants, but she's going to be the hero. And you don't have to do that in the D.B. Cooper story. Tina is already a hero. Florence is a hero, too. All of the members of the crew. I don't think they were involved. Sorry to throw water on those conspiracy theories. But what I think is more valuable is that I think that they're trying to just sort of portray Cooper as someone who was much more aggressive toward the women than he actually was. And that might be something that, I don't know if that's going to be something that's completely accurate. But again, in the write-up for this movie, Not If You Understand, they said that they wanted to do this from Tina's point of view. Maybe she was scared out of her mind. I mean, I'm just kind of like playing the opposite side now, what we call a counter-argument or counterbalance. And if you're in Tina Mucklow's position, and you've held on to your story for so long, why not just share what you were really feeling? Yeah, this guy was threatening to kill us all. Yeah, I was scared. All right, fair enough. And when you think about the flight attendants, Tina and Florence and Alice, they had so many opportunities to write their own books. They could have written a series of books on Cooper themselves. They could have done countless documentary programs themselves. They could have been the forefront of the Cooper vortex. But they chose not to, because I think that all of them, even the other members of the crew, like Bill Radicek, they got frustrated with it after a while. They're just like, we really didn't interact with him that long. Yeah, for a long time, but not that long. They're starting to forget things. People are asking them lots of questions over and over again, and they wanted to move on. And Lehman says Tina chickened out of the movie and it was never picked up. I wouldn't be surprised. Lehman says, what if Cooper buried the money at Tina Bar for Tina to pick up later? Well, Lehman, Tina did a terrible job of that. 9 years in the sand. Where are you at, Tina? I mean, I think you're trying to say maybe Cooper buried it at Tina Bar for her to pick up in 1980 or something. All right. 10 years later, I'm going to put it at Tina Bar. You have 10 years to find it. You'd have to do something like that, because, or maybe she just didn't care. I don't know. And Batman66 says, who was the cowboy guy DB Cooper had a word with on the flight? Oh, they were just talking about him on one of the videos. Was it the Trading Post or DB Cooper Sleuth? When they're saying that he's talking to Cooper and he thinks that Cooper is rude. Crap. Drawing a blank on that. But yes, I did just hear about that. The Real Cornet says, just tuning in, the cigarette butts, where are they? Can they ever be found? When were they last documented? Well, the Real Cornet you just got here? The estimation was they existed until December of 1971. Where can they be found? They have been destroyed by all reports, destroyed in the garbage, thrown out in the trash. And Lehman says that Tina chickened out of that movie, so that's a real shame. She's the centerpiece of it all. Now, the Real Cornet says, could he have never even jumped, hit on the plane? Ryan Burns has a very good video on that when he's talking about how almost certainly not. Because when Cooper went down the aft staircase, there was a pressure bump, and also the weight distribution in the plane would have accounted for somebody going down the aft staircase, jumping off, and not going back up to hide in the secret compartment. And there are people out there who do stand by that theory to this day, like Harriet Suchet, who are pushing their narrative about how D.B. Cooper hid in a secret compartment for an extended period of time, and she actually thinks that he jumped over Reno as opposed to the Pacific Northwest. But again, going through all the steps, I think Cooper left SeaTac Airport, and to the credit of Ryan Burns and Chris Cunningham, they really count down the time to the minute. When did Cooper jump? 8:13, 8:14, 8:15, 8:16, 8:17 p.m. on November 24th, 1971. That would place him over southern Washington, where you have the pressure bump, where you already have Tina up with the officers. All of that is consistent with Cooper jumping out of the airplane. Not over Reno, Nevada, sorry. But again, now, Lehman, you can challenge me on this if you want. But I just think that means that Chael Sonnen's drop zones, both of them, are going to be completely wrong. That something about that is going to be off because, again, on all of the sources that I've been going through before today, they're saying that, if anything, the drop zones are farther to the east than what people might expect. Chael Sonnen's would have to be farther to the west. Gifford Penchant National Forest, Mount Hood National Forest, those are to the west of the expected drop zones. I'm just not seeing it work out, people. Lehman says, Tina chickened out of going and picking up the money at Tina Bar. Oh, she didn't chicken out of the movie? Yeah, I read it's a relatively recent article, and I didn't see anything about the movie being canceled or something like that. She chickened out of picking up the money at Tina Bar. Chickened out, but also, just one aspect of human behavior. Maybe she just didn't want to bother with it. Would you bother with $5,800? Yeah, I would. Greed, sorry. But maybe Tina Mucklow didn't, Okay, Lehman defers to beyond that. That's just my estimation. And you guys know I'm not the biggest Cooper expert in the world. I'm just seeing things go in literal different directions. And Ed Edwards says, I used to think that for the longest time. I recently watched a very thorough video but an expert went through why that's not possible. That was most likely Ryan Burns' video on how it would have been impossible for Cooper to avoid jumping. Like I said, weight distribution, pressure bump, all of that coming in line. Oh yeah, Lehman, I know you don't think Chael's suspect is D.B. Cooper. And the reason why I made those two episodes is simply because, number one, someone had presented me with a different aspect of the D.B. Cooper case that I hadn't talked about yet. Number two, you give everybody a chance. If someone is going to go public and say they have something, I'm going to hear them out. And number three, and this is what I think you're on board with, Lehman, you just wanted to know the rest of the story. Nikki B was saying the same stuff. Like they want to get to this part of the story. Well, who is this guy? How can we evaluate him as a D.B. Cooper suspect? We don't even know his name yet. And you guys can read up about him. Thomas Eugene Jetty, Tom Jetty is how he is referred to as, and he passed away. He's been dead for quite some time. No, I'm just saying all of the signs going against him. There's still some strong points, but... And one thing that Chael did say in the cameo video was he is now gung-ho on how D.B. Cooper would have used the motorcycle to go through the Indian land, as he called it, to get back to his desired location. In the past, he openly stated that that was an observation from his father. Putting two and two together, this guy liked to race motorcycles, so they expected that he was using a motorcycle in the dark and in the rain for 3 hours, whatever. But they expected he was using a motorcycle. In another interview, Chael said that he is the one who connected the dots about him using the motorcycle because his suspect had a passion for racing motorcycles. And now, in the cameo video that he just released, talking about his invitation to CooperCon, he stated that absolutely, that's how this guy did it. He had the motorcycle station there. And, there are two possibilities for this one, and Chael is not making it easy on us to try and figure it out. Okay, Lehman says, exactly, yet it is a cool story that points toward the folklore around D.B. Cooper. Yes, it's just the mystery within the mystery, and you want to figure out what people are talking about. All right, everybody, well, this episode of Cooper Friday is winding down. Thank you so much for listening to me talk about D.B. Cooper in many different directions. And one more time, I was citing an article from everend.com. They have a lot of true crime info over there. Number 2, you can visit Fred and Noodle over on the Trading Post, and they have all types of different true crime stories. And interestingly, they had a video on the disappearance of Bobby Dunbar. And that was a case that I followed back in 2018, but that was 6 years ago. It even got to the point where I forgot his name, and I thought his name was Jimmy Dunbar. But Jim Dunbar was a talk show host from the 60s. But the disappearance of Bobby Dunbar, and I used to follow that case for a while, but interestingly, that is the reason why I stopped watching BuzzFeed's true crime videos, because in 2018, they had this obsession of making true crime comedy podcasts. They were all over the place. We'd be like, hey, somebody died. Why is that funny? Like, where they're not just, throwing in a humorous statement like once in a while, or they're not just poking fun at the absurdities of the case. They're actually making fun of the victims. And that was so popular in 2018, and BuzzFeed took it and they ran with it. They did this horribly disrespectful video about the disappearance of Bobby Dunbar, and that was just made me close the door on them. And to this day, I do not use BuzzFeed for any sources as a source for Black Box Online Radio, and I don't watch any of their content. I just thought that, hey, this is some poor taste crap. I don't want anything to do with this. But the Trading Post also has a video on the disappearance of Bobby Dunbar, and I particularly liked their episode on the escape from Alcatraz. And we always have to remember, the escape from Alcatraz was committed by Frank Lee Morris, John Anglin, and Clarence Anglin. And Frank Lee Morris is what? A D.B. Cooper suspect. Next subject. And also want to give a shout out to DB Cooper Sleuth. If you want to follow along with anything DB Cooper, of course, we have Cooper Friday here, but please go over and subscribe to Ryan Burns on the DB Cooper Sleuth channel. Just about to get 1,000 subscribers, and the Citizen Detective podcast as well. Also about to get 1,000 subscribers. Lots of things going on. And we have a final thing here from the Real Cornet that I will respond to. Have you seen the photograph of the man in the sunglasses that looks exactly like the sketch at the airport area Hotel Supper Club taken the night before the hijacking? No, I haven't actually, Cornet, but I'm going to try my best on that one. And Channel says, can't wait for the Vincent show on Monday. Yes, on Zodiac Monday, my guest will be Vincent McConnell. Please tune in. That's going to be a very big Zodiac Monday. And the Real Cornet says, I made that up, but it would be cool. Don't do that, sir, please. Thank you. I was actually about to get on Google right after this episode. No, I haven't heard about that. We have enough people spreading disinfo. We have to sort through Chael Sonnen and David Gold, who says the escape from Alcatraz DB Cooper connection is real, and the Real Cornet is joining in with them. No, thank you, sir. That will be all for me now. You guys know where to find this stuff. You know how to get in touch with me. blackboxonlineradio at AOL.com. Episode all about DB Cooper. And I will see you on Mysteries with Mr. Belgique. And there will be an episode of the audiobook coming out this weekend for the White Horse Killer saga. On the 4th story now, The Eyes of the White Horse, written by me, Ned DeHaan, Black Box Ned. Until next time, guys.